All right, you guys are like, I always thought like we Germans are super like on time and stuff, but you really like overdid it here. Like we're 2 minutes early. But I think that's fine. We'll just like, start slow, and as more people will, roll in, we can just accompany them in our session here. I never had live captions, that's super cool. Okay, I hope you are all here to learn about what it means to become an engineering manager. These slides are not a regular slide deck, this is a Miro board, and you can join this. You can just scan the QR code. It will lead you to this Miro board that's holding the presentation. So if you have any accessibility needs, or if you just want to explore the board on your own, you are very welcome to do so. It is read-only, at least for the moment of my presentation. And while I will leave all of you the opportunity to scan the code, I'd like to understand you a little bit better. So I'd like to do a quick show of hands. So who here in the audience identifies themselves as an engineer? Oh, that's almost all of you. So, okay, cool. Who identifies himself as an engineering manager? Okay, that's a third. I see a few people like double raising their hands. I did this. And I think that's very fair, right? Okay, the last question, promise. Of the people who raised their hand of being an engineer, who wants to become an engineering manager at some point in their career? Okay, that's not that many people, like 20, yeah, something, I don't know, maybe. And that's fair too, and I don't think that's a life decision. Like, you can swing back and forth anytime. So I think we made the introduction. Now I can do this very German thing of being like super on time. So I like to start this talk with telling you a story of my growing up and becoming an adult. So when I was that age, which was in 2016, I was 17 years old, and I spent most of my day here. I was a level 60 holy priest on Frostmourne, and with this guild that I was part of, we were one of the first who downed Ragnarok worldwide, actually, and the first ones on our servers. That was something I felt back then really proud of. Nowadays, I think it actually means nothing. Who would have thought that the skills that I picked up back then will become handy like 20 years later when I joined DNS Simple? I joined DNS Simple almost exactly 20 years later in 2016. And I started as an engineer. DNS Simple is a domain management automation platform, so you can buy and register domains with us. We help with any needs you have regarding DNS. We have an awesome API, and that's it for the sales pitch. I am part of the registrar operations team. I was the person who was dealing with that part of the code base for the longest time anyway, even before there was a registrar operations team. And when we decided that as part of DNS Simple, we really want to have this registrar operations team, I raised my hand and said, yeah, I can actually be the manager there, because that was something that I was interested in anyway. So about becoming an engineering manager. First thing that I had to learn, and that I think is really important, and I would like you to hear as well, is that it is not a promotion. It's not a clear path from junior to senior to manager, right? There is this pattern that exists all across our industry that you get promoted up until a point where you're no longer good at your job. And I think that's a pity. I think we're losing many great engineers that way, and we have a lot of bad managers in our industry, and that's a bummer. It doesn't have to be that way, and I think this is one of the key things. We must understand that becoming an engineering manager is not a promotion, it's a career change. It's about managing others, and it's about managing other engineers, right? So all of a sudden, you see other people do the job that you actually love doing. And that's just a thing that you have to understand, and that's not a problem, right? It's just something you have to run ahead to or run towards to with open eyes. And it also requires a completely different set of skills. All of a sudden, you're dealing with humans rather than computers. And I can tell you that humans are pretty random. I like to think of skills and skills that I have and skills that I need as engineering manager like tools, right? I go throughout my day, and then I encounter a challenge, a problem. Much like when I'm, working in my house or in my flat. Like I see a leaking sink, and usually I do not know what to do about it. So I check my toolbox and might find a proper tool to actually screw the thing that's leaking. And that's the same in business. So I see a problem, and then I look back at the things I know I have picked up over the course of my career, and maybe there is a thing that I learned that comes in handy to solve that problem, right? If I have a report that's really unhappy, I might engage in a conversation. I think that's a skill. And there's many ways of having a conversation, and there are ways of having a good conversation, and there are also ways of having a bad conversation. I am pretty sure you all have been there. But much like the toolbox that I have at home, my skill set, I never thought of them as being that actually ordered, right? My toolbox at home is like, it has 2 compartments, and I usually just like throw stuff in there, and it never has the same color, and never, it's never this neatly sorted. And one of the skills that I had to learn in becoming an engineering manager was growing people. I think, at least to me and the engineering manager that I always want to be, is growing people is a very important skill. Right? You have people that look up to you, you have people you are responsible for, and helping them grow and becoming a better version of themselves is really important. Learning all of this and realizing that growing people is important to me, I learned a tool called Career Vectors. And this is not something I came up with. This is a tool I learned from Mary Williams. Totally check out her content. Big shout out. I think it's really cool stuff. And this is what we will focus on for a lot of this talk. So what you do in Career Vectors, it's basically giving you a different perspective on your career. You're dissecting your career into 6 different sections. And then you give yourself a rating, usually from like 1 or 0 to 5. And then it might help to understand where you're at and maybe also where you want to go. So these categories are hands-on, which is the hands-on stuff that we do day to day. There's strategy, which is everything that helps your company succeeding in the next 6 months to 12 months. There's delivery, which is getting projects out the door. There's org management, everything that makes your company successful by not working on the product. Commercial is the understanding of how money is made at your company and how the product actually works. And domain depth. Domain depth is understanding the domain you're working in. So for the simple, and that's kind of funny because our domain is actually domains. It might also mean if you're working for a payment provider, you want to understand credit cards. If you're working for a ticketing shop, you want to understand ticketing. That's domain depth. And when I learned about this, and when I drew this map for myself, I was like, wait a second, I've seen this. I think this looks a lot like this, or at least this was how I thought about this. I know it's maybe a little bit hard to read, so I have a bigger version here. This is the Final Fantasy X skill tree, called Skill Sphere in the game. And I think it's a perfect analogy, right? So it works like this. Here's a little bit of a closer shot of the same thing. In the game, you're collecting experience points, and then you have like a representation of all the characters, all of the playable characters in the game, and they're sitting on the board, and with like a little bit of those experience points, or I think it's ability points, they can unlock a new skill. So they just like hover, and then they can decide a direction they want to pick. They can go like multiple directions. They can like walk the thing. And what I love about it is that all those characters that you're playing, they're all on the same skill sphere. This sphere is massive, right? It's really, really huge, and they all start on a different part of the sphere. But they all, at least in theory, have the same access to the same skills. And I think this is much like we, right? In theory, we can all learn the same thing, but just like how our nature is as humans, it might be harder for some than for others. And we are all starting at different points, right? We might have engineering as our second career. We might have started programming from the age of 7. We might be starting at a very disadvantaged position by our gender identity, color of skin, all of those stuff. All of this comes into play, and I think this is a nice analogy. And as any analogy, it's never a perfect fit. And because I'm using Miro, I just want to show you how big it actually is. So that's the whole skill sphere. And yeah, I made this reference when I did this, and I wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to see if I can do that kind of a thing, but for tech skills. So that's what it is. I sat down, I had this idea, because that's how my brain functions. I want to do talks about these ideas. So I submitted a talk, not having any content. So yeah, I want to see if I can have all the skills that I know of, that exist in tech or that I can think of, and put them in a similar skill tree thing. And as many of those things, many of those experiments, I want to give a very big fat disclaimer. This is all just how, this is where I wrote this, right? This is all my perspective. All of the stuff that you're going about to see is just how I perceive it, and obviously there is way more, right? I don't know if who of you was in this room when there was this talk about quantum computers and stuff. This wouldn't even fit on this mirror board. This would be another mirror board. And I still consider this the skill tree. So that's what I want to do in this talk. I want to walk over those categories, and then we can see what kind of skills are hidden in here. I also want to be very precise about one fact. What I want you to walk out of this room after my presentation is not knowing all of this. I want you to understand that these things exist. Ideally, you have a notepad handy or your phone and you want to take pictures or you check out the board later, because there are things on here that I would like to explain, concepts, very briefly, that other really smart people have written books about, so you can go ahead and read the book. Right? That's the idea. So I might give you keywords. I want to tell you about things that exist in the world, and we will not have the time to go over all of them in much detail. So let's start. In the middle, it all starts with you, as described in the Final Fantasy skill tree thing. We all start at a different point in our careers, in our lives. And the first branch I want to just cover is hands-on. And they're the basics, right? You need to know algorithms. You will probably want to know relational databases. And then I also put data structures in here, and I think that one is particularly funny because we all have been in this place where we've reversed a linked list in an interview, but the moment you join a company, anything you actually need is lists and hashes, and that solves 90% of the job, right? And there's way more, obviously, in computer science too that you might need. Debugging is another very important skill, and at least this is how my brain does debugging. I discover something that doesn't work, so I go in and peek into it. I put it out, I print it to console. If that doesn't work, I just add more of this so I can understand where the flow is actually going. This, in 90% of the case, solves the problem at hand. And only then I get out the big guns and use stuff like JDB or visual debuggers and rarely hit this point. Another one is patterns. I actually had a hard time coming up with all of these just to fill the slides because I think it's good to understand the patterns that you're using on a day-to-day basis, and this might depend on your code base. And you might notice the one on the right here, solid, is not actually a pattern. It's more principles. And at least that's what I felt in my day-to-day job, that this is really good to know. And all good code bases I've seen are making really good use of this patterns or objectives. Solving problems is another really important hands-on skill, right? We all do this day to day. I think that's what our main job is. Someone comes to us with a problem they have, give us money, and we make the problem go away. Code reviews. A few thoughts from me on this one. I think it's really important if you do a code review that you should leave your ego at the door, right? Code reviews should be done with no ego. Even though you wrote the code, this is not your code. And if others leave you feedback, they're not criticizing your character, they're criticizing the thing you wrote, and this is not meant in a way that you are a bad human. Also, and this is really a thing I want to highlight, know your position in the company, right? Are you the senior engineer that is in the company for 10 years and you're reviewing a junior's PR? I want you to really think about what comments you put in and what comments you don't put in. If there's an architectural flaw, that's something worth pointing out. If there's a variable you would have named otherwise, think about if it's worth doing it and adding a comment, because especially if you add both comments, there's usually not a way to weight these, so it's really hard to tell apart which one you really care about, right? So I think it's doing code reviews requires a lot of self-reflection. Also, when we have to solve problems, usually we have to solve more than one problem, so getting them the right order is really important. Also, we should understand the problems we are solving. And I intentionally put it in that order because I feel like way too often we do it in this order, right? We solve problems, and then once we have solved it a few times, we realize that it actually was a different problem. And exploding brain is actually solving the right problem because there's so many to pick from, and it's really important to actually understand them and do the right one that you want to solve. So that's the hands-on category. And the next one that I'd like to dive into is delivery. And again, it all starts in the middle again. And here we have delivery, which means getting stuff out of the door. And I think really important as the baseline is knowing these different shapes or the different forms of project management, right? There's Scrum, Kanban, the simple use ShapeUp. And ultimately, what I've seen in almost all companies who do any of those is understanding agile principles and then build your own Scrumban. Like at the end, most companies do not follow it by the book, which I think is a good idea. Just understand what agile means and having fast feedback and all the principles that live in it and apply it just in the right amount that you need and still can ship something, because I think no one of us wants to have 7 meetings that are described in the Scrum book. Delegating is another part of delivering work, right? You cannot, even though if you want to, solve all the problems by yourself. So working in a team is really important. Understand how delegation works, how other people perceive things you ask them, putting in structured documentation, and also reporting progress. Making things easier, scoping down. Once you have a problem, you want to not solve all of it, maybe you only want to solve the important part. And this skill I call operational execution is a thing that I think is really important for engineers, which is breaking down big tasks into smaller problems that are way easier to solve and think about, right? And this goes hand in hand with delegating because it's also way easier to delegate smaller problems. Proactive communication, giving regular updates, communicate progress, any blockers, impediments, that's something really important as engineers, right? This is part of the job, even though it's not shipping code. And understanding the value of things, shipping value, ship often, right? In simple, we ship multiple times a day, and I hope that in the development world we are currently living in, that this should be normal. And I also believe that customers should benefit from every release that we do, right? Because otherwise, why are we doing it even if the customer doesn't get any benefit from it? And the benefit might be like farther in the future, or it might be like taking a few extra steps because we might be more efficient, but in the end, the customer should benefit. It's also about understanding your personal productivity, and this is something that came to me a little later in life, I want to say, but still I think it's really important that you understand how your brain is functioning and what makes you productive, right? What is it that you need that makes you productive? And it's not that I want to advocate for any of these particular projects or tools that are listed here. This is just a few, like Pomodoro technique or using a bullet journal or whatever it is really about understanding what makes you productive and apply this on a day-to-day basis. And once you have mastered this and understand what makes you productive and what helps you to get the most out of your day, then you will master the skill of getting shit done, moving things out the door, being productive, and get all of the to-dos crossed off the list that you have set for the day. So we are now done with hands-on and delivery, and the next category that I want to look into is commercial. So commercial is, again, how your company makes money. We are, again, starting in the middle. And the first thing that I think is important for all engineers is understanding your company value proposition, right? You should be able to answer the question, why should I buy your product? That's important. And I think many engineers, especially starting in a company, it might be a harder question to answer, right? For some, it might be easy. I don't know, if you do grocery delivery, that might be one of the more basic needs. But also there's competition in the market, right? So you should understand how you differentiate to the competition. In commercial, this is also can be important. There's all the understanding of budgeting, basic finances, reporting, accounting. It depends a little bit of like how your team is functioning, how big your company is. If you're working in a 5,000 employee company, you probably have very little to do with how accounting works. You might still have to deal with budgets, right? If you're a leader, if you're in a leading position, or maybe if you're a regular individual contributor, you might operate on a budget and you want to make the most out of it. And putting this one in commercial, I know, is a little bit misleading. And what I actually mean with that, and I don't want to put it on slides, is deceptive design. Trick people into buying your product while they really don't want to or don't need to. I think it's a bad pattern, but apparently as the industry, we have agreed to do this. And while I'm not a big fan, I think it's at least a thing we need to be honest about. Another important thing is product thinking, right? Every change you make has an impact on the product that you're building. Any commit you do, any line of code you change, it has an impact on the product, and you should understand what it is, right? How does it change the product? How does it change the product in the long way? How it may have effect on the product value proposition. Does it have one? And if it doesn't, should you still ship it? Right? All of those questions, I think, are important to understand and keep in mind while you work. Public speaking. I think this is part of commercial. It's part of sales, actually, right? I'm standing here talking to all of you, and while I'm not selling any stuff that we are building at DN Simple, you still know that I work at DN Simple. I'm wearing their shirts. I've distributed stickers across the conference, and you know that at DN Simple there's one engineering manager who cares about all this stuff. So I think this is still an important part of sales. Writing, adapting to the company voice, writing blog posts, writing feature announcements. Especially the voice part here, I think is really important because we as an individual contributor, we are writing a lot of documentation, right? We also might write a lot of public documentation depending on the product we have. And it is so important that it all sounds like it would have been written by the same person. It would be so weird if you look at docs that have different styles all across the board. So I think that is another really important thing too. And similar to product thinking and understanding your company's value proposition is doing some competitive analysis, right? Know who your competition is and what they're doing. Know what they might be doing next is really important. And here we are, as you can tell by the bigger border on the left-hand side, we're getting close to the final skills and to the maxed out value of commercial. I think it's really important to listen to customers, right? You should listen to them, understand their problems, and understand how you can help them solve their problems. But what is really important, and this is why I have this later, is not listening to customers. You should have a vision, right? Customers only know what they know, and they only see your product as what your product is, and your customers usually do not have a vision for your product. And when you just join a company, I'm not saying you should be the one who has a vision. You might be the one who understands the vision. But if you're working for a sub-part of the project, you maybe want to have a vision of the sub-part, right? Or you at least want to understand the vision. Help define it, depending on how long you are, how big the team is, right? A junior engineer in a 5,000 people company is not the one who defines the vision, right? Still some interesting understanding of this might be important. Okay, so we have done half of it now. And the next category that I want to drive in is strategy. So what does that all mean? What is strategy? Strategy is delivering company value that is not now, that value might be in 3, 6, or 12 months. And the first thing in strategy might be roadmap planning, right? It might be project planning, having done some waterfall, doing some agile, doing this awful Gantt charts. We are using OKR, so that's the thing that Google did, objective key results. It's a project management framework that helps you with operational execution, so you can break down big problems into smaller ones, and those smaller ones can be broken down again and down again and down again, and you can manage an organization with like 1 billion layers with that. And this is something I do really care about personally. Retrospectives and just the idea of learning and getting better and understanding that there is more to technology and working as a software engineer than just software engineering. Having retrospectives as a group, as a team, doing shared learning, I think is really important. Have an understanding of culture, right? You want to understand culture, you want to define culture, and you want to live culture. You have to understand that culture is not what you write on a wall. You have to understand that culture is your boss coming in the morning and making coffee for everyone. That is culture, right? Culture is defined by your everyday actions, by the people who everyone is looking at, how they behave. This is the culture of the company, not something you write in any wiki article or whatever. And Kaizen is a tool, I don't know if many of you heard about it, it's a tool of constant improvement. It's a thing I usually do in retrospective. So we plan an experiment, we do this experiment, and after we've done this experiment, we check the results, and then we act on it and might be implemented for a longer time. And we do this over and over. That's the wheel of improvement, right? We do these steps over and over again. Reporting is another one that I think is important. Reporting up and also reporting down. You have a boss, they have a boss, you might have reports, and doing that good helps everyone. Another part of strategy is making hard decisions. And this ties back into solving the right problems, right? You might have two problems that seem equally worth solving, but you only have a finite amount of time at your hand. It's also not going after shiny objects, right? There might be other things we call low-hanging fruits, and I think it's really worth digging into if this is really something that is that low-hanging. And make boring interesting. And I want to tell you a little story about that one, because I think it's not very self-speaking, but I was really inspired by this. So I was at a conference, and this is almost 10 years back now, where I saw an engineer from Stripe. And that engineer gave a talk about how he was tasked to re-implement the credit card form. And he told the story how he got this task, and that sounds like the most boring thing ever, right? A credit card form is so well defined. You know right ahead what you have to do, right? You do those credit card digits, then you have to get this CCV number, you might get an expiration date, sometimes a zip code, that's it. Sounds really boring. But the approach he took was so interesting and inspiring that he said, I want to make the most awesome user experience of putting in credit card data into a website that ever existed. And this is how what you now know as the Stripe credit card form came to be, right? It's where the tabs are inserted automatically. There's no weird jumping around of the cursor. It always does what you kind of expect, even though it's hard to tell why it does that. It has this little thing where the credit card type flicks at the right-hand side. It does not allow you to enter numbers that don't make sense, this kind of stuff. And I think that is an approach that was really inspiring to me, because there's no such thing like a boring task. It's really about the mindset, how you approach something. Also, understanding your company and the business is really important. And also understanding business metrics, right? If you want to improve the product in a greater scheme of things, you understand how you can measure this success. Measuring success in engineering, in performance, for example, is really something that's common to all of us, right? If I can serve a web request in just 50% of the time that I used before I improved this database index, that's a well-defined success. But how do I measure the same kind of success in the business, right? You want to understand all the different metrics that your company is tracking on the grand scheme of things. And also thinking strategically, and that's something you can apply all over the board, right? That you can apply this in a more global sense. Whenever you do an action, whenever you do a commit, whatever you do on your day-to-day basis, have a thinking, have an understanding of what impact this has in the longer run. I might want to check how much time I do have, though. When are we ending? I have 5 minutes. Wow, that's not much. All right, so let's do it. The next thing is domain depth. And I think we can really take a shortcut on domain depth, because domain depth actually really depends on your domain. Right? There are a few things that are more abstract, like talking to experts, asking for help, learning on the job, owning the domain depth, having an open mind, right? Going throughout your company and want to learn and want to hear what others are doing. And build up your own discovery techniques, right? There are many things that exist at probably your company too that you might not understand and you might be tasked with at a certain point, and you want to build a system how you can help or how you can build understanding of this. It's also really important to understand what motivates you. And this ties back to the personal productivity. Learn more about yourself. How do you learn? I'm a person, I take notes extensively. And this is how I learn. I usually never revisit them. And also, understanding a fixed versus a growth mindset. This is about how you take failures, right? Books have been written about this. I cannot go into too much detail, but it's really about taking every failure you encounter as an opportunity to learn. Don't blame the system. Always take everything as an opportunity, right? And not as a threat. So now the last one. That is organizational development. And I think this is really important. I want to skip ahead here a little bit just because of the time. So working in teams, and that is something that could be applied to anything, right? But I put it here. And that was something I want to talk about. The team clock, that is something that is a concept that I would like to share, because I'm 100% certain you all have had this situation where your team changes and your team has gone through those 4 processes, even though you might or might not have noticed it. Someone joins the team and you all start like forming new, like you understand your new role. Everyone is finding their place in the new team. Then everyone brings in their own ideas, and you might have the storming phase where you need to have negotiations. Everyone has their own ideals. And in order to settle this, you enter this norming phase where you agree on things, where you find common ground. And when this is over, as a team, you move into this performing phase where you finally get value out of the door. This is basically the next steps of having retrospectives, actually be the one who facilitates them in your company, running those retrospectives and understanding how team collaboration works. And there's this big block about communication that I think is also really important. And I want to point out one very particular thing. This is the Schulz von Thun. So I want to show of hands, who has heard about Schulz von Thun? That is awesome. No hands, because now I can tell you about it. Me being super ignorant, writing this talk, I was assuming everyone knows this, because this is part of German school education. So every German, or everyone who visited a German school at one point, should have heard about this. This is about the fact that everything we say has more levels. Like every message we send has more than one level, right? If I say to you, the specs are red, there's many things in this message, right? There's a factual message that the specs are actually not functioning. You might have heard an appeal that you should be the one who fixes it. There's also a relationship layer when I'm your boss, that I'm telling you, giving you the order to fix this. And there might be also some sort of a self-reservation that I'm pretty mad at you. And this is not a tool about solving any of this. This is just about helping you to understand that this exists, right? So whenever I encounter like a misunderstanding, it's usually that what I'm saying is not what you're hearing. And just having the tools at hand to understand this is really, really helpful to me. And this is like the most weirdest point here in this presentation, because I'm standing up here talking for 40 minutes. And I think it is still important to listen as a skill. And the most important part, and I only want to have the last one, and this is really the most important thing to tackle, but also the hardest one to implement, is in order to make the organization better, in order to help others grow, you need to be a leader. And in order to be a leader, you need to lead by example. I cannot tell you to put the dirty dishes in the dishwasher when I am not the one who puts the dirty dishes in the dishwasher. I cannot tell you to fix the specs when the specs are broken if I am not the one who does that, right? And this is true on all parts of life. This is true when you have children. This is true when you have a partner. This is true even for your dog, right? You tell them to sit, you make this gesture. So if you want to lead, you always have to lead by example. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept. But if you want anyone to change, you have to change too. So looking at this, it all seems like quite a lot. And I want to offer a simpler perspective. So you can also not just have all the skills, you can also just draw this map, right? You can just rate yourself in all those categories and get this perspective on your career. And this is what a junior engineer might look like, right? They have a lot of hands-on experience, a lot of delivery. This might be an architect, right? They look quite different because they're advancing at different skills. They're putting a different focus on their career. This is what a staff engineer looks like, right? There's more careers than, junior, senior, manager. This is what a growth hacker might look like. There's all those different sorts and ways of careers that we can have. And what I want to do, and I know we are running a little short on time, but that's an experiment that I really would like to do, is I would like you to draw your engineering manager skill tree, because that is what I would like to take you away from this talk, that every organization is different. Every one of us is different. Being a leader and being that leader that you want to be is actually pretty easy. We all had bad bosses, right? We all had shitty managers. If you want to be a good manager, just be the opposite of that shitty manager that you always had. And that's the way to be it. So I would like you to take a picture of this. And I want to leave the slide on for a little longer. And just go in with your laptop or with your phone or whatever, and draw the engineering manager that you want to be. And if you don't want to be an engineering manager, that's fine, right? I would love to hear it. I would love to see it. Maybe you want to tweet it at the conference, you want to tweet it at me, you can put it on any social media, you can also send me an email if you like. I would love to see it, and if you mind, I would also love to share it, because I'm pretty sure we'll get a lot of different results, even though we are all kind of talking about the same job. And this is my main takeaway, and you might have noticed this tracks across the entire talk, but this is really the main one, and this is why I want to point it out. If it's about advancing in your career, it's really about getting in the driver's seat of your career, because if you are not building your career, no one will. You are the one responsible for it. It's not your boss's job. If you have a good manager, they might help you with that, but in the end, you are the one who is responsible for your own career. I found this tool really helpful for myself to actually do this. And I just use it as a tool to facilitate conversation and to get a different point of view of what I can do and what I want to do and where I'm at and what I want to learn. My name is Michaelis, never mentioned this. I'm from Germany, Hamburg. I'm the third time here at the Vox Days, DevVox. I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm really thankful and grateful that you had me here. And I don't believe we have time for questions, but I am around a little longer. So if you want to talk about any of this, if you want to talk to me because you cannot talk to your manager and you have a certain thing you want to talk about, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to give any career advice or just listen because I believe I'm pretty good at this. Thank you all very, very much for your time.